Hello and welcome to the Mermaid's Cave. I'm Leslie Levison, and together we are going to have a dazzling crazy quilt adventure. A crazy quilt is made up of randomly pieced blocks that are then put together and embellished with embroidery and beadwork and whatever else you can find. I like acorns. In this first episode, I'm going to be using a piece of muslin and scissors, a needle and thread, a number 9 sewing sharp, which is a sewing needle, a few pins, and of course some fabrics. Now, how do we get started? How do we go from a plain piece of muslin to a beautiful crazy quilt block? I've marked the back of my muslin that it's 11 inches. And the reason I do this is so that if I want to add more blocks later on, I know what I started out with, because as you embroider on your block, it's going to shrink a little bit. So now I'm just going to take one of my fabrics. I'll just cut a piece off of it. Doesn't matter what shape, doesn't matter how big. And I'm going to put that right in the middle of my block. Actually, no, I'm not going to put it right in the middle. I'm going to put it a little bit off center. Then I'm going to cut a second piece of fabric. And with this piece, I'm going to do what I call the sew and flip method. So I'm going to lay my two pieces, see that they line up, put right sides together as such. If you want to stick a pin in there, that's fine, but you don't really have to. And then, then I'm going to shut this off for a minute. Okay, now I've got my sewing thread, and I am just going to do a fast running stitch. Not that I personally run very fast, but what you want to do, it's just a big stitch. It's just to hold the fabric in place until you get your embroidery done. So it's really a basting stitch. It doesn't have to be neat. It doesn't have to be consistent in size, just as long as it holds the fabric together, right? And you can just do a little back stitch and cut off your thread. So now I'm going to I've sewn, and now I flip it up, and I've got my first piece of fabric on my crazy quilt. Now I'm going to take another piece of fabric. Sorry for the shadows, I'm still getting used to this. I'm going to cut another piece of fabric. Put that over there, put that over there. It does save you a little time if you get all the fabrics that you want to use ironed before you start. Now, if I continue doing that sew and flip method, I'm going to end up with something similar to a log cabin look. In other words, I'm going to have all straight seams. If you look at antique crazy quilts, you'll see that they very often have lots of different shapes on them because they were cut from garment scraps, basically. So to replicate that look, I am going to cut my fabric a little bit curved, like so, and then put it on my piece. And then I'm just going to quick applique it down. Now here's where I might use a few pins to hold it in place. Again, I just have a few pins in there, and now we're going to sew. Take my thread again, and again, we're just basting. It doesn't have to be neat. This is not true applique, which requires very tiny invisible stitches. So again, thread came out of my needle. That happens. And we're just going to continue basting across this piece of periwinkle fabric. And again, you can see that the stitches are very big, not neat, not exact, not beautiful, but they are functional. I'm going to backstitch again and take a little piece. Okay, so now you'll see over here I've got kind of a diamond shape. I got a point here, so how do I deal with that? I'm going to sew one piece. So I'm just going to sew a piece there. And if you want to make a convex, I think, convex, if you want your arc to go inwards. So now I've got an inward arc. See here, it's going across like that. And again, I'm just going to pin it, but I did clip it first. If you are a home sewer, you know that when you're stitching a curved seam, you often clip to release some of the tension. So it's the same principle here. And then again, I'm just going to baste that down. I'm going to continue to alternate between sewing and flipping and doing my applique so that I get the whole block covered with fabric. I will say just a few words of advice. Antique crazy quilts were very often made out of taffetas and silks and brocades and velvets, etc., etc. If you are going to use a velvet, you want to make sure that your velvet is on the high side of your seam. In other words, if you're using silk and velvet, lay the silk down first and then stitch the velvet on top of that. Because if you lay the velvet down first and then stitch the silk or whatever you're using on top of that, you're going to get a really big bump under the lighter, the velvet is going to cause a huge bump under the lighter weight fabric. It's always tempting. I always had students who would come in with gorgeous upholstery fabrics, tapestries, and things that are very heavy, very beautiful, but very difficult to needle. So I would stay away from those. You can always use those for a border or a backing. I would also stay away from cotton velveteen. Again, it's very pretty, but I've always found it very hard to needle because the back of the fabric where it's woven is very, very dense. I do want to demonstrate for you how you make it with lace. If you want to use a piece of lace in your crazy quilt. Of course, you can always add it on top. However, if you want to add it into a piece of lace into your crazy quilt block, obviously you don't want the muslin showing through your lace. So what you would do is you would take a piece of fabric and then take your lace, and I'm just going to cut this so it's straight. Okay, so now I've created a new piece of fabric essentially with a piece of lace over another piece of fabric. And then I would just turn the whole thing over and stitch it as though it were just all one piece of fabric. Just going to take a little back stitch here. You can either knot your thread or just take a back stitch. It's whatever works for you. So here we have our piece of lace over a piece of fabric. and that can just be incorporated into the whole quilt. If you'd really like to follow along in the upcoming episodes with all the embroidery and embellishment, but are not particularly interested in making a crazy quilt, it's okay. I won't take offense. You can use a piece of felt, you know, like the kind of felt that you buy at Michael's or Joann's or any of your, you know, local hobby store, and just stitch on that and stitch along with us on that. And that will give you a nice little sampler piece to have a reference for different embroidery stitches. So go ahead and fill out the rest of your block until it's all finished and all covered, like this one. When you're finished sewing, you turn your block over, and if there's any excess sticking over the edge, you just trim that even. Right? Some people like to go around the edge of the block and stitch that, you know, to keep everything in place. I don't. It's up to you. So until next time, I would suggest, if you really want to do this along with me and create another crazy quilt, make 4 muslins. If you don't have muslin available and you can't get at it, a plain piece of fabric will work. If you've got a cotton, you know, if you've got a quilting stash, an off-white or plain cotton will work fine. If you've got, you know, old shirts like Oxford shirts or something like that, you could use the back of the shirt and cut that. If you don't have access to fabrics, there's equilter.com, which is where I get my fabrics from, a lot of them. Obviously, once you let people know you're doing this, people will find things to give you, believe me. It'll come out of the woodwork. You also want to, for next time, we're going to start doing some embroidery. So for next episode, have some either number 5 or number 8 pearl cotton. Number 8 is what usually comes on a little spool. Number 5 generally comes in a skein, although you can get all the different pearl cottons in a spool as well. And again, basic things you can get at your local craft shop. If you have a real good needlework shop near you, by all means go there. You know, shop locally, shop small business. You will also need a skein of embroidery floss. I suggest you use DMC, it's the best. And a number 9 embroidery needle and a number 3 embroidery needle. Now, if you go into the store, you're probably going to see packages of either 1 to 5s or 3 to 9s. Pick up one of each. You're going to use them. It's not a big expense. So that's it. So next time, signing off from the Mermaid's Cave, and I'll see you next time around. Bye-bye now.